be going through a Kawasaki KE 175 carburetor. This is a 1980 model. There'll be a handful of years that the carburetors are going to be identical. I just wanted to go over a couple things. We're going to go through, clean and rebuild completely this carburetor. I wanted to show you a couple different tricks and tips on doing that. Obviously, we've got the carburetor off. Our throttle cable that comes from our twist throttle on the right-hand side on our handlebars comes in here. I've done a separate video on how to remove this carburetor and actually a video on how to clean the carburetor when it's sitting on the motorcycle. Now, I prefer to pull the carburetors completely off. It allows you to go through, inspect things a lot more clearly, and allows you to go through and clean them a lot easier. Now, a quick fix would be to turn that carburetor, pull that bottom bowl off there, blow through your jets, and get back on the road. More thorough clean would require you to pull this carburetor off of the motorcycle and clean it that way. Now, typically, when you remove this carburetor off of the motorcycle, this cap is going to come up and stay with your actual throttle cable. What I've done here, remove the throttle cable, push this cap back on there so that we can go through and show you exactly all the components of this carburetor, not just the bottom end of it. So, pulling this off, again, if you want to check out how I've removed this cap, check out my other video. I'll put a link below. This cap, typically, there'd be a bolt type fitting that goes into this top cap here. You're going to unscrew that with your cable. Your spring is going to be running along the outside of that cable, so the cable is going to actually be on the inside here. And when you pull that off, your needle and your slide are all going to come with it. So there is your slide there. There's your needle there. Your throttle cable is actually going to hook down in this fitting here. Now, to pull this fitting out, what you would do is grab a small Phillips screwdriver. There's 2 Phillips screws there. Remove those screws. That's going to allow you to pull everything out. You don't have to go that far if you're just removing the cable. All you do is push that cable down slightly, maybe a ½ inch, if that, and then pull it out on the open side of that groove there. This piece here needs to go in before going back together completely, and this sits down in there and it actually holds that throttle cable in place. If you let off of your throttle, that throttle's got a little bit too much slack. If you don't have this metal piece in there, if that cable goes too far down and pops back up, you could pull that throttle cable out of this slide slot there. That is why you need to have this on there. This is going to be big enough to where this spring here is going to sit right down on top of. It's going to hold that spring in place there. It's going to hold that throttle cable in place. Enough about that. If you do need to remove this needle here, you do have to remove those 2 small Phillips screws, and then this needle will slide right out the top of that. Going back together, just make sure you've got your needle down in that center groove there. Put your 2 Phillips screws down there. I'm just going to show you how to do that there quick. Again, 2 Phillips screws. Okay, grab a small pair of pliers there and take and lift this up. Now you can see here the groove that I was talking about. Your throttle cable is going to have a thick enough end to where it is not going to go past this area here. It's not going to go past this area here, but it is going to slide into that slot there. When you've got it back on the slide there, this is actually going to come down here and it's going to hold that throttle cable in place. Now you're able to take that needle out, tip it upside down there. You've got a spring, you've got a plastic spacer here, you've got a clip that is removable, it's not adjustable on this one, and then you've got a plastic clip that sits on top of there, or a plastic spacer, if you will. So going back together, slide that down into place, make sure everything seats properly. That spring will pull that needle back up if you're not careful. Slide this down into place, and there's going to be a certain direction that this is going to go because your Phillips screws need to go down into the threaded slide there. Turn that to where it needs to be. Take this piece, and you can use your needle nose pliers if you need to, but set that into place. All right, once you get those snugged up, then make sure your needle's got some movement there, because you don't want that thing stiff as a board when you're going back down into your carburetor. You want to make sure that that is able to slide into place. Then we'll set this stuff aside. I'll show you how to assemble that when we're going back together. In the meantime here, I'm going to get through this carburetor. You've got your fuel inlet here. That's going to run down into your bottom bowl area there. We'll get into that in a little bit. Here's an overflow nipple here. You've got an overflow tube. If that fuel is sloshing around in the bottom bowl of this carburetor, it's going to dump out this overflow nipple here. You want to make sure you've got a fuel line on here that flows directly underneath of your motor. Otherwise, this fuel that's coming out this overflow tab here is going to actually drip onto your motor. It's going to cause some discoloration there. We've got our choke lever here. You're going to push this down to engage the choke. You're going to lift it up to disengage the choke. You've got your choke port here. This is going to allow more airflow through your choke assembly here, allowing more fuel to get sucked up from your bottom bowl there, and that's what causes that idle to be raised up a little bit until your bike warms up. Once your bike is warmed up, you want to make sure and shut that choke off. Otherwise, you're going to be getting too much fuel from this area of the carburetor and your bottom jets here. The combination of both of those is going to allow too much fuel down into that cylinder. You're going to be running extremely rich. So a lot of times once your bike is warmed up, if your choke is still on, you're going to get a very, very rich mixture and your bike's not going to run good. Kick that choke off. That's going to cut that airflow through your choke port there off, and your bike will run smoother. Idle adjust is here. Turn it clockwise to turn your idle up, counterclockwise to turn it down. I'm going to get into this more detail when we go back together, but that larger, fatter groove there is actually where that idle adjust screw drills into. You turn that screw in, that's going to push your slide up, and that's going to allow more air to flow through there. It's going to, again, suck more fuel up. Turn it down, opposite is going to happen. That's going to lower that slide, lower that needle, going to allow less air to get through there, and then therefore not sucking up as much fuel. Again, setting that aside, we're going to continue on. This is a two-stroke motorcycle. I think I've already mentioned that. You've got an oil pump. You've also got a separate oil reservoir for your the two-cycle part of it, and this fuel is automatically mixed with your fuel pump and your inlet coming in, your oil inlet here, and then your fuel inlet. Those mix as needed. That's why on your throttle cable you actually have a line going to your oil pump, so your oil pump knows how much oil to send to your carburetor to get the proper mixture. Now, a lot of times guys will eliminate that oil pump. They're going to eliminate that oil reservoir, because if for some reason your oil pump isn't working correctly, or possibly a plugged up hose, you're going to be starving your bike for oil. You're going to cause your bike to get seized up. So guys will eliminate that port on the carburetor. You can actually just block it off, and you can mix your fuel and oil in your fuel tank. You want to make sure you got the proper mixture for your altitude and riding conditions. To pull the bottom bowl off here, I've showed you in the other video what you do when you remove that cap. Obviously, shut the fuel off at the fuel tank so you're not going to continue to have gasoline dripping here. Obviously, if the carburetor is off, that fuel is going to be shut off. Otherwise, your floor of your shop will be covered in fuel. So, pulling this bottom bowl off here, you've got 4 Phillips screws. Remove those, and then pull this cap up. Now, if you ordered a carb kit, I'll put a link below for those. You will receive a bowl gasket. That's this gasket here, and you want to make sure that that's in good condition. Now, sometimes you can get away with reusing this bowl gasket. You do want to make sure there's absolutely no flaws in this gasket, or you're going to have some fuel leaking between your carburetor housing here and then your bowl. And you want to make sure that those are working properly. Here is the overflow tube that I talked about earlier. That fuel is coming in from your fuel inlet over here. It's going to go through your needle valve here. Your float's going to be, again, remember your carburetor's flipped over. Your float's going to be open. Your carburetor is going to be filling up with fuel. That is going to raise your float. That is going to shut your needle and seat off. That's under this position here. If for some reason that needle and seat gets stuck on, it's going to not lift this float completely up. It's going to allow fuel to continue to drain down into this bottom bowl. Instead of that fuel going directly into your motor, it's going to go through this overflow tube here. If this overflow tube is functioning properly, that fuel will come in there and dump out this bottom nipple here. So in reality, if you take compressed air at this point and blow through this port here, it's going to shoot out this here. All the time, that should be opened up. You should never block that off. You should never run a screw in the bottom here. That's not going to fix your fuel dripping on your shop floor issue. That is going to load your cylinder up with fuel and cause a major explosion inside your cylinder. Don't do that. Leave that fuel line open. Do not block that off. You want that fuel to drain out there. That being said, if you've got fuel dripping on your shop floor constantly, or in the back of a trailer, if it's sitting there, if you have fuel dripping, I will show you what to do here. If you're driving down the road and you see in the back of your pickup or on your trailer that you're dripping a little bit of fuel out of that bottom nipple here, that is okay. That's perfectly normal. Fuel slosh around in there. Some goes down that inlet there and will drain out the bottom. That's perfectly normal. I would suggest shutting that fuel off when you're trailering it so that fuel doesn't constantly drip down in there. Now we've got our fuel that's coming in here, like I said, in that port there. It's going to run down this fuel line here, going to come out this bottom tab. We've got a needle and seat here, or a needle valve is what some would call it. We can take this off. Here's your float. This has got an adjustable tab on there. You can adjust that, and that's what I started to say earlier. This is an adjustable needle and seat. So if your float level is not at the correct height, you want to make sure you check that. I've done several videos on how to check that properly. You want to make sure that you adjust it properly. If you've got a motorcycle that's constantly leaking on your shop floor, on your garage floor, don't just take a screwdriver, bend this tab completely down. You will actually starve that motorcycle for fuel or allow way too much fuel in there, and you will not fix your problem. You'll cause more major issues. So replace that needle if needed, and replace this seat if needed. Do not just go and adjust this tab here because you've got a little bit of fuel on your floor. Sometimes what happens is you get dirt and debris in your fuel tank. It's going to run down here. It's going to go through your seat area here. It's going to get lodged in between your seat and your needle. It's going to hold that open. What you need to do at that point, remove your needle, blow through here with compressed air. If you're going to replace this seat here, remove this Phillips screw, remove this valve here, inspect the O-ring, replace that. If you're replacing that seat there, clean that out, make sure that port's free and clear, and you're good to go. That is a very, very common issue that these need replaced. Also the seat. If you order a good high quality carb kit, it'll come with the needle and seat. A lot of times those are a little more expensive. Some of the cheaper carb kits don't include the needle and seat there. You want to make sure if you've got a leaky fuel issue, make sure you order one with a seat there, or your needle valve and your seat there. I'll put a link for that below. Again, remove that screw. This holder here comes out. Very carefully remove that with a pair of pliers, or sometimes you can even use your finger there. Setting these parts aside here, I'm going to remove next the main jet. This is the largest jet of the two. It is a flat-headed screw, and it is a brass jet that can be damaged and destroyed very, very easily, so be careful. You should be able to see through that when you're holding it up to light. If you cannot, you want to make sure you've got a jet cleaner tool and make sure that that is completely free of any dirt and debris or gummed up fuel, because this is essential that you can see through there. If you cannot, your motorcycle will not run past an idle with your choke off. So what I told you earlier about your choke and the choke position, if you've got a motorcycle that will only run when the choke is engaged, more than likely you've got an issue with your main jet. Because if your main jet is plugged up, you've got your choke on, that's going to allow enough fuel and air through these ports here to allow your bike to run. If you shut your choke off, that's going to cut off essentially almost all air and fuel going to that motor, and you're going to have a bike that does not run properly. So if your bike sits there and runs on choke, but does not run when that choke is off and your bike is completely warmed up, check your main jet. Next thing you want to check is your needle here. Make sure that that port there is completely cleaned out. You can actually take carbon choke cleaner and compressed air, blow through that port there, make sure that that's free and clear. Again, make sure that that jet is the correct size for your altitude and riding conditions and the performance parts to your motorcycle. Make sure that your needle is the correct size. You can get different sizes of your needle as well. Next, we're going to go to our pilot jet. Now, if your motorcycle does not start or it does not seem to idle, first thing I would check is that pilot jet. The problem with motorcycles is you only ride them a couple months out of a year. They sit a lot of times the rest of the year. These pilot jets have extremely small orifices and they get gummed up very, very easily. Also get a small piece of dirt or sand in there. Very easy to plug those pilot jets up and it'll allow your bike not to idle. Again, it'll run when you've got it choked because that's kind of a bypass for fuel and air to bypass the bottom end here almost completely. And so it may run with your choke on. You shut your choke off, it does not seem to idle because that pilot jet is plugged up. When you've got your main jet running, so you're giving it throttle here, your main jet's here, you're giving it throttle, so it's raising the slide. It's also raising this needle. This needle is coming out of the main jet, allowing more fuel to flow through there. At the same time, more air is flowing through here. So if you're going wide open throttle, that slide and that needle are completely open. Not quite that far, but I'm just trying to show you what's going on here. This main jet that sits here is allowing that fuel to flow through there as freely as it wants. If you restrict this main jet, that's going to slow that amount of fuel down. If you get a longer needle here, that's also going to slow that fuel down. If you have got a bigger jet, that's going to allow more fuel to flow up through there as you're giving it more throttle. Back to our pilot jet. That has to do with idle. So this is completely closed. You have essentially no fuel flowing up through this area here, which is this area here. All that fuel is flowing through your pilot jet area. It's a very small orifice, so it just has to do with idle. Once you're done idling and you're starting to give it throttle, all of that fuel is going to come up through your main jet area. It's not going to come up through your pilot jet area, or at least very little bit of it is. So that is why it's essential that your pilot jet is cleaned out so that your bike will idle, so that your main jet is cleaned out so that your bike will rev up. Do not use your choke to limp your motorcycle along, or you're going to cause some serious motor issues. It's going to be running too lean, or if you leave it on all the time, it's going to be running too rich, going to cause some serious issues. Blow through all these ports with carbon choke cleaner. You're free to do that. If you've got a gasket here, I like to remove that gasket because that carbon choke cleaner is very, very strong, and it can damage some of those parts. Also, it can damage rubber parts. So if you need to remove any other rubber parts off of your motorcycle, do that. Your pilot jet takes a very, very small flat screwdriver. So this is the size of flat screwdriver that we're using. You won't be able to get a big one down there. You do not want to use one that's way too small. Or what you're going to do is actually take that small flat screwdriver and you're going to turn it inside of the actual flat screwdriver area. You're going to cause that port there to be mangled up. Could potentially plug that jet there. And so you want to make sure you use the right size screwdriver when you're pulling this pilot jet out. Again, you want to make sure you can see through there. If you hold these two up together, the main jet and the pilot jet, you're going to see a substantial difference in the size of that port. You want to make sure you have got the right size pilot jet in there. This pilot jet is a 22.5. So very, very small. This main jet here is a 1025. So you're gonna have probably different jet sizes than I have, just depending on riding conditions and altitude, again, and performance parts. That's gonna change those jet sizes. So you wanna make sure you have the correct one for your application. That's the size of jets that I have. Your idle adjust, I mentioned, is here. You can actually take and unscrew that if you need to. Make sure that these are spinning freely. Make sure they're in good condition. Typically, you don't find these gummed up or damaged because all they are, there's no fuel that's going to be flowing through there. You do want to make sure that you've got a good O-ring here because if this is leaking air, obviously you're going to be sucking outside air and debris into your carburetor. You don't want that. Make sure you've got a good O-ring there. Make sure your spring is in good condition. When you screw that in, take it in as far as it was, if you remember. If not, you can just take it in and run it in a little bit. Your slide should go completely down. From there, you can adjust your idle accordingly. So you want to make sure that your motorcycle is completely warmed up. Make sure your choke is off before you start adjusting that idle. So I like to do about a quarter increments at a time, in or out, after my bike is completely warmed up and we're ready to go. Both these lines, I've had several people ask me what these lines are for on the side. Both these lines that come in here and on here will actually go up into this port here and here. So you want to make sure when you're cleaning this carburetor that you blow through both of these ports. They should have free flow between that line there and this port here, this line here, and that port there. You want to make sure that there's no dirt and debris in those lines there. Okay, going back together, I'm going to take our main jet. We're going to throw that in there. You want to, again, make sure you use the right size screwdriver when you were putting this in. These are brass jets, and you can damage them very, very easily. Put our pilot jet in there. Make sure all those ports are completely cleaned out, free of any dirt and debris. Snug that up. We've got our float here. Put our needle in there. Blow through that port with carbon choke cleaner and compressed air. Take and slide that down. This is the direction that it needs to go. The little tab is going to be up, so keep that in mind. This pin here, if you can't get it out, I would not suggest grabbing a sledgehammer and trying to pound it out. These tabs here are crucial to this motorcycle. They're also extremely fragile. So if you have one of these break, you are replacing the carburetor. So keep that in mind. You do not want those breaking. I'm going to try to have a link below of this carburetor here available for sale. I'm going to try to keep these on hand and always have these readily available. So check out my link below for that. When you're tightening up these Phillips screws, you don't have to go Hulk mode on it and tighten these down so much that it rounds these off. A lot of people will try to get that gasket to seal up by tightening these down to 300 foot-pounds. You do not need to do that. If you've got a good gasket in there, a good snug turn will be adequate. You don't have to go crazy Hulk mode on those to seal that up. Now our needle and our slide here, you're going to want that to slide straight down the center of it. Again, larger groove is going to go on the idle side. The other side, this groove here, has got a pin that sticks out. It gets you to put this down in the correct position. Make sure it stays in the correct position while it's running. Typically, if you'd have your throttle cable coming in, this piece would need to go on there. Make sure that seats properly. Again, if this is hooked up to your throttle cable, this spring would already be on that slide. This cap would already be on that slide, and you just take and screw that in. That up there. To get into our choke assembly, I'm not going to get too detailed here, but you can remove this choke assembly by using a 12mm wrench there. Take and loosen that up. Once you get it a couple turns out, you can use your finger. It just makes it a lot easier. You don't get a whole lot of turn on that wrench there. Once you get that completely unthreaded, you can take and pull that up. That's your choke assembly. That is your plunger there. There's a spring underneath there. There is an O-ring that sits here. You want to make sure that's in good condition. And then this should go up and down freely. You also should take carbon choke cleaner, blow through this port here. It's again going to blow through that port there. So if you take compressed air, blow through this port, it's going to shoot up the top there. So make sure that that's in good condition. Now take and slide that back down in there. If the choke is not an issue, you just need to clean that area out. You don't actually have to disassemble this entire assembly here. Going back together, make sure that that O-ring is good, like I said, and go ahead and snug that up. Once you get it past finger tight, grab your wrench. And that choke assembly, once it's snugged up, should stick in either position. So you should be able to push that down or pull it up, and it should stay in that position. If it doesn't, this tab here has got some issues, or you've got some issues down in that plunger assembly. So that is the carb clean on a 1980 Kawasaki KE 175. If you guys have questions, make sure you let me know those in the comments below. Please subscribe to our channel. Share this video with your friends and family. Help us out by doing that. We'll continue to make these videos, and I hope this is helpful. Thanks for watching.